Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Impractical Privacy. This is your weekly dose of truth about your digital life. I'm Sudo, the host of the show. If you're new here, welcome. If this is not your first episode of the show, thanks for listening and welcome back. If you are new here, each week we cut through the tech jargon and deliver the real privacy news you need to know, from data breaches and surveillance trends to simple, actionable tactics and tools you can use today to protect your information. Last week, we touched on a ton of topics, including ads, trackers, and data brokers. So if you're not familiar with those or need a brush up, let episode 2 be your guide. We're going to start today's episode off by talking about privacy news dealing with the Tor Project a little bit. If you've never heard of or aren't familiar with Tor, what it is and does, don't worry, I promise you're not alone. I'll break it down for you. Founded in 2006, the Tor Project, an acronym for the Onion Routing Project, is the research education nonprofit primarily responsible for maintaining and updating the Tor network. They do a ton of other things too, like develop Tails, a privacy-focused Linux-based OS that routes its data through Tor and by default doesn't leave behind any data when shut down or restarted. The Tor project also publishes the Tor browser, which allows people to access the Tor network, but that's all background. Sudo, what is Tor? Tor is an anonymous network protocol that, when configured and used properly, can help people fight censorship in their region, as well as remain anonymous online. It's also the only real way to access the darknet, which is mainly just like regular websites, but you can only visit them through the Tor browser. How it works is by creating a chain of encrypted tunnels between multiple computers. For example, a user opens the Tor browser, and the first thing it does is establish a route. It will first find an entry or guard node. The guard is the only piece of the Tor network that knows where the traffic is coming from, but it doesn't know where it's going or what it is. The next link in the circuit is the middle node. The middle node doesn't know anything about anything, basically. It knows the first and the last nodes, but not where it's originating or the destination. Finally, the connection will go to the exit node. The exit node is the only one that knows the final destination of the internet traffic. But it's 2 whole nodes after the user, so it doesn't know where it came from either. All the traffic is encrypted in this chain, so the packets in transit can't be snooped on either. The Tor project doesn't run the network itself, though. They just maintain the software on which it all runs. The Tor network is run by volunteers donating their time, bandwidth, and computing power to make it all happen. And since it's run by volunteers, some people here might rightfully ask, what happens if a bad actor decides to set up some nodes to capture traffic? And yeah, that happens, but it doesn't make a real difference because of how the chain works and how the whole tunnel is encrypted. As of this recording, November 2025, there are over 9,000 active relays on the Tor network. Anyway, I bring up Tor because they just recently announced that they are replacing their decades-old encryption method with a new one called Counter Galois Onion. Its main function is to close some vulnerabilities that could be used to compromise someone's privacy while using Tor. The legacy system had 2 primary security flaws. Most severely, attackers could modify encrypted data during transmission and predict how those modifications would affect network propagation. The vulnerability allowed for traffic tracing and the potential de-anonymization of users. Furthermore, the system lacked sufficient forward security as it retained duplicate encryption keys for the entire duration of a circuit. Meaning, if the encryption keys were captured and broken, all data sent for the duration of that specific connection could be decrypted by an attacker at a later date. So this is a huge step forward in cryptography for the Tor network and its users. Their website is in the show notes if you're interested in downloading or learning more about the Tor project, Tor itself, or Tails. For what it's worth, using the Tor browser for regular browsing isn't super recommended. Generally, it breaks a decent number of sites and it's slow, but it's not an awful thing. It certainly makes it harder for businesses and organizations to have a functional browser fingerprint of you and spy. which leads us into our next topic of surveillance pricing, also deceptively called personalized pricing by businesses. If you didn't check out last week's episode or aren't super familiar with browser fingerprinting, I recommend either listening to that first or doing some quick Googling, as it is related to this. If you aren't familiar with surveillance pricing, don't worry, I got you. Surveillance pricing is a profit-maximizing strategy where companies use collected personal data, such as browsing history, location, purchase patterns, and demographics, all to set unique, individualized pricing for the same product or service. Unlike traditional dynamic pricing, which adjusts price broadly based on factors like demand, surveillance pricing aims to charge each consumer the absolute maximum they are willing to pay, often resulting in personalized and rapidly changing prices for every user. Some of the real-life occurrences of this, to me, teeter between just plain wrong and borderline cruel. Some actual examples of surveillance pricing are travel companies charging Mac users more than PC users. Their logic was that their computers were expensive, so they were willing to pay more. Brick and mortar retail businesses charging more for the literal exact same item online if there was no competitor nearby to you, or if the geolocation on your phone says you are already in their parking lot. The logic on this one is that you either couldn't or wouldn't go to a competitor. Test review companies charging more if your geolocation shows you are in a zip code with a higher number of Asians. It's gross to say, but the thinking on this was that Asians have a higher expectation within their family to test well and do good in school, so they would be willing to pay more for test prep and study guides. Rideshare companies charging more if you had a corporate credit card on file versus a personal card. Simply put, you wouldn't care if it's not your money. In addition to that, they can charge you more if the battery on your device is low, as they know your time to catch a ride is running out. Internet providers giving worse deals to poorer neighborhoods. It's been verified. Article in the show notes. But I'll be honest on this one, I can't figure out why. It didn't seem to have to do with competitors or adoption rates or network build-out. I dug into quite a number of articles and found a lot of data, but no real conjecture on why. So, what can you do to help prevent a business from taking advantage of you with your data to charge you more? Combine last week's recommendations around browser fingerprinting with the idea that an app isn't always your friend or looking out for your best interests. Utilize web apps. On every mobile browser I have tried in the last 3 or 4 years, they have all had the option to add the current page to home screen. It creates an icon on the home screen of your device that isn't actually an app. It takes you to the site on which you were when you clicked the button. Simply put, a well-configured web browser will be leaps and bounds better at protecting your data than an app will. Now, I realize that not all apps have a web app, and certainly not all the web apps have all the features we all need. If you've got apps on your phone that you use and can't replace with a web app, go through the permissions in the settings on the device and double check that you have not agreed to any permissions you didn't mean to. That's just a good privacy habit anyway, but specifically for surveillance pricing and data collection on apps, it can help. Okay, so we've been talking about how surveillance pricing works, how companies track our clicks, location, and purchase history to figure out the maximum price they can charge us. But where does the most intrusive and continuous stream of data for this come from? It's not just our browsers anymore. It's the Amazon Echo, the Google Home, and similar devices we willingly place right in the middle of our homes. The second you bring a smart speaker into your kitchen or bedroom, you've essentially invited a corporate data miner inside the walls of your most private spaces, creating a constant feed of behavioral data that fuels the same surveillance economy. Fighting surveillance pricing often means changing our browser, clearing cookies, using VPNs, and faking or denying location data. But the battle for privacy has now moved from the checkout into our most private spaces. While we worry about a store tracking our shopping habits, a smart speaker is tracking far more sensitive, intimate data, the cadence of our family life. When we're home, our conversations, what TV shows we watch, and even potentially what health or financial information we discuss. This isn't just about paying $5 more for a flight or whatever. It's about the complete and total commodification of your life, which in turn makes the data used for surveillance pricing incredibly powerful. And it's not just charging us more that's of concern. These devices are always listening. I know, I used to use them, trust me. They were in most rooms in my house. They made it convenient to have music playing, communicate between rooms, set alarms and timers, and so much more. They're always listening to nature means they're always looking out for that wake word. Some are more accurate than others, but in my experience, there were so many accidental triggers of the devices that it felt borderline intentional. That's not the end of the concerns, though. Pretty much any smart device can use your home network against you and map out your network and look for what types of devices you have on your Wi-Fi and report that back to the mothership. You think a megacorp or whoever wouldn't use the fact that you have a $1,700 smart fridge on your Wi-Fi against you? Be real. And like we've talked about before, it's not always just the organization that you agreed with. A lot of times, they have partners and they share that data with their partners. A prime example of this is a lot of news sites are now prompting you to agree to their cookies so they can share your data with X number of partners. So you may trust the entity that you're choosing to share your data with, but maybe not one of their partners. Their partners might even have atrocious data protection policies. But businesses failing to keep your data safe is a big topic for another day. But while we're all side-eyeing the smart speaker on the counter, suspecting it of listening to our conversations, most of us are staring blankly right at the biggest snitch in the entire house, the television. Chances are good if you bought a TV in the last 5 years, it's a smart TV. Smart TVs make our lives easier by allowing near instant access to the content we want to watch, along with not needing additional devices to use them. However, most new TVs, and especially smart TVs, are almost certainly doing something called ACR. ACR stands for Automatic Content Recognition. Basically, your TV is taking a screenshot of what you're watching on your screen every few seconds. It doesn't matter if you're using the built-in Netflix app, or if you have a cable box or computer plugged in, or even if you're playing a video game on a console. It captures the pixels, fingerprints the content, and matches it against a massive database to see exactly what you're watching or doing. Why, you might ask? To build and expand the profile of you that we've been talking about. If the algorithm sees you playing 4 hours of Call of Duty every night, it knows you're a gamer, likely male, likely between the ages of 18 and 35. Now, let's say it sees you watching Paw Patrol every morning at 7 a.m. It knows you have kids, and it sells that data. In fact, Vizio, now owned by Walmart, one of the biggest TV brands in the US, has publicly released financial reports showing that they make more money from selling user data and advertising space on their TVs than they do from actually selling the televisions themselves. Let that sink in. The TV is cheap because the hardware is the bait. The real product is the data feed coming from your living room, and it's getting worse. LG has recently started pushing full screen ads into their newer TVs that pop up as screensavers when the TV is idle. You paid $2,000 for an OLED TV, and they're turning it into a billboard in your own living room. And the ads don't just stop at the TV. Samsung's $1,700 smart fridges with screens in the doors are starting to show ads on those screens. The smart devices we're paying to bring into our homes are spying on us and then serving us ads. We should all be outraged because what television manufacturers are doing is wildly privacy invasive. But I hope you don't just listen to this to hear about the problems. Let's talk about some solutions to the TV aspect of our homes spying on us. First and foremost is focusing on rewarding the manufacturers that aren't doing this. Surprisingly, Apple is the only brand that's in your living room at all right now that isn't participating in ACR. The actual television you have it hooked up to is, but Apple itself isn't. So if you're going to be streaming to an older or disconnected from Wi-Fi TV, then Apple is your friend. However, disconnecting from Wi-Fi often isn't enough. Some of these devices will talk to others and build a mesh network until they find one that is on the internet and report home that way. The best practice that I've discovered for this is to block the domains and IP addresses at a DNS level, which we've already talked about. Using either a paid monthly service like NextDNS, or a more tech-savvy do-it-yourself approach with the PiHole, which does require the purchase of hardware but doesn't have monthly installments for software. As previously stated, I use NextDNS, and in the last 30 days on my home Wi-Fi with my Roku TVs trying to phone home, they have reached out to Roku servers and been blocked by NextDNS over 21,000 times. That's roughly once every 2 minutes, all day long, every day the TV is plugged in and on Wi-Fi. Roku is both the number 1 and number 5 most blocked domain on my network. At the other end of the spectrum is to physically modify the TV so its Wi-Fi antennas are disconnected. But before you do this, please read about it. I'm not wanting to be responsible for any broken TVs or TVs that can't be set up without an internet connection that are now not capable of connecting to the internet. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of having these ever-listening devices in our most private spaces is that more than once, law enforcement has been able to subpoena the company that runs the servers for the speaker and pull data logs and recordings. Now, again, I'm not implying that everyone has something to hide and that law enforcement having every tool available in their arsenal to catch the bad guy is a bad thing. I think we could potentially be living in the golden age of police work. But instead, sometimes the way it seems is that we're replacing quality police work for an easy win. With the amount of times that my personal smart speakers used to go off, I'm sure you could catch a glimpse of all types of conversations occurring in my house. Parties, arguments, conversations about politics as well as religion, and literally everything in between. It would be awful if someone had one of those in their house and, let's say, had an uncharacteristic fight with their spouse who then had something bad happen or end up missing. A smart speaker happened to catch an accidental trigger word, perhaps when someone yelled something like, "Fine, okay, go." And suddenly there's needless additional focus on the spouse due to evidence that didn't catch the fact that maybe they made up like 15 minutes later and continued on with their evening like normal. I'm not saying people shouldn't be held accountable for crimes they've committed. I just don't think I'll be voluntarily bringing an evidence collector into my house, especially one that only remembers parts of some of the conversations it sat through, but whose word is taken as fact. Now is the part where I tell you what steps you can do to mitigate the drag on privacy these smart speakers are in your homes. Well, bad news. There's not too much you can do if you intend on keeping them. I know the ones I've previously owned have all had mute buttons on them, and that's pretty helpful potentially depending upon how you use them and if you trust the button. It is not a physical switch that disconnects the microphone in most of them. Now, if you're using them as a Bluetooth speaker more than something to talk to, that is a potential option, but in a second we'll talk about the drawbacks with that. However, the reality is there's not a real way to make these things more private. I had 7 Amazon Echoes at one point all over my house. The only solution I found after months of trying to figure out what to do was to sell them. I posted them for a steal on Marketplace and let someone else invite Amazon into their home. And it's not just the smart speakers in your home either. All 3 of the big do-it-yourself home security options, Ring, Google, and SimpliSafe, will give camera and microphone footage to the police in the event that they present a warrant. Some of them will even do it without warrant in an emergency situation as permitted in their terms of service and protected by federal law. But it goes way beyond that. Ring, which is owned by Amazon in case you didn't know. Notice a theme Amazon has? Anyway, they have recently partnered with law enforcement for license plate tracking on their security cameras. Yep, the Ring doorbell will track license plates now, which is a whole different can of worms for another episode though. But Amazon product lines like Ring, Echo devices, even Fire Sticks and TVs, even lights and motion sensors will create a network for themselves in the event that your or a neighbor's Wi-Fi isn't strong enough for a reliable connection. But let's say that you still have that Amazon Echo device from earlier, but you just disconnected it from your Wi-Fi for now while you look for potential solutions. Don't worry. Your neighbor's Ring cameras will make sure that your without Wi-Fi smart speakers can still get on the internet. That feature, if you want to disable it on your Ring and Alexa devices, is called Sidewalk. There do appear to be some open source alternatives to the smart speaker concept, but from my reading, none are mature enough in development or usability to discuss in any meaningful fashion. Hopefully in another few years, we can have a better chance at using one of those. But for now, we're going to shelve that. And that really wraps up this week's episode. Thanks again for tuning in and listening. I know the most valuable thing we all have, especially during the holidays, is time. So I really appreciate you giving me that roughly half hour or so of yours when you do. As I previously have stated, content like this really does thrive based on community interaction and feedback. I'm still new to this, so as of this recording, the main ways to chat about anything are either through the chat in Patreon or emailing me directly. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share it with your family and friends. If you'd like to support me in this journey, I do have a Patreon. Links to my Patreon, the newsletter we talked about last week, email address, and all the news articles and quotes mentioned, as always, are in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Impractical Privacy, and tune in next Wednesday for a deeper dive into mobile privacy, how and why iOS and Android differ in this space, and what the real options are. As always, we'll cover current news in that space as well. Oh, and starting in December, on my Patreon, subscribers to big fan levels and above will get a bonus episode a month. So check out the Patreon for additional exclusive content coming soon. December's episode will dive heavily into flock safety and the cameras going up all around America. And remember, just reach out in whatever way works best for you if there's anything that I didn't touch on and maybe explain well enough, or something that you'd like to see an even deeper, more in-depth dive into. Either way, don't worry, I got you. I'm Sudo, this is Impractical Privacy, and I'll catch you next time. Oh, and one last thing before you go. Why was the social media user always feeling gross? Because they kept accepting cookies without reading the ingredients.